This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse murder and their families. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 200, Dennis Vaughan Jr., Part 1. In 2016, toddler Dennis Vaughan Jr. and his 3 siblings were removed from their parents' custody due to concerns of substance abuse and domestic violence. They were ultimately placed in the Laconia, New Hampshire, home of their maternal grandmother, Sherry Connor. Their mother, Danielle Vaughan, had experienced her mother's abuse firsthand and knew Sherry was mistreating and abusing her children. Over the next 2 years, DCYF received at least 27 reports of child abuse and neglect against the Vaughan children. Despite these warnings from Danielle and several others, including mandatory reporters, DCYF continually overlooked the increasingly egregious and shocking ways Sherry treated her grandchildren. Only after Sherry accidentally sent Danielle audio of one abusive incident did DCYF act, and it was nowhere near enough. This is part 1 of the heartbreaking story of Dennis Vaughan Jr. This is an episode a long time in the making, and I'm honored to bring you Boo's story during a milestone episode. After 200 episodes, over 5 million downloads, and almost 5.5 years, each and every one of the over 150 kids whose stories I've told has a piece of my heart. Boo, of course, is no exception. Now I'll get into his story. Danielle Nicole Vaughan was born on April 30th, 1989. Danielle remembers her mother, Sherry K. Connor, who was born on October 27, 1962, as being erratic and having violent outbursts. Sherry was friends with a man named Dennis M. Vaughan, who was born on February 27, 1956, in Belfast, Maine. He graduated high school in 1974, after which he served for a time in the U.S. Army. Family members described Dennis as being quick-witted and charismatic. When Danielle was just 15 years old, Sherry up and moved to Florida, leaving her daughter behind in the care of 48-year-old Dennis and his then-girlfriend, with whom he had 2 children, Jared and Mac. He also had 3 older children from another relationship, Dennis Jr., Kayla, and Jana, who passed away in a car accident in 1997. If you're thinking father figure, think again. Remember that whole charismatic thing? Dennis groomed Danielle, a literal child, into thinking they were in a romantic relationship. It's worth mentioning that no child can legally consent to sex with an adult, especially an almost 50-year-old man. By the time she was 17, Danielle was pregnant with her first child. It's not clear when Dennis broke up with his girlfriend, but Danielle said that at 18, she was forced to marry him. Over the years, Danielle and Dennis Sr. had several children together. Their daughter, who I'll call SV, was born in 2007, followed by 3 boys, MV in 2009, IV in 2010, and Dennis Vaughan Jr. on June 11, 2014. As soon as she laid eyes on her 4th child, baby Dennis, Danielle began calling him Boo, and the nickname stuck. Little Boo was born premature at 35 weeks gestation, weighing 5 pounds 11 ounces. Because of uncontrolled bleeding, Danielle stayed in the hospital for 3 days, while Boo stayed for 7 days. When he was finally allowed to go home with his parents, Boo was too small for a standard car seat. They had to order an Angel Ride infant car bed, which were specially made to transport preemies and low birth weight babies. She later tearfully told a reporter with WMUR News 9,
"When they put him in my arms, he has this birthmark on his head, and it was the only place that grew hair."
The Vaughan's home life was unstable. As to be expected from a man who deliberately chose a partner who was legally a child and more than 30 years his junior, Danielle says that Dennis Sr. was abusive, controlling, and violent against her and the children. He was repeatedly arrested for drugs, and both parents struggled with drug addiction. In early 2016, police raided their home in Laconia, New Hampshire, arresting Dennis Sr. on drug charges. In the fallout, the New Hampshire Division for Children, Youth, and Families, or DCYF, removed all 4 children over concerns of substance abuse and domestic violence on Dennis Sr.'s part. Danielle retained her parental rights even though the kids were under DCYF's legal custody, which made her a non-custodial parent at the time. Danielle later told a reporter of that time, "That was the beginning of a horrible 4 years." She was also pregnant with her 5th child with Dennis. After the baby was born, Danielle said she began working to break all ties with Dennis Sr. and planned a trip to Maine. She asked Sherry to babysit her then 4-month-old baby during her brief trip, and Sherry agreed. Danielle left all the baby supplies Sherry could need, and she went so far as to pay her mother to care for the baby. While she was out of state, Danielle said, Sherry went to court and told the judge that Danielle had abandoned her youngest child, leading to Sherry receiving guardianship over the baby. Danielle said Sherry even managed to get her kicked out of her housing situation, leaving her own daughter homeless for 2 months. At this point, without a home, Danielle couldn't even fight to get her kids back until she corrected that issue. The 4 older kids were living with a foster family, but during that time period, from February through June 2016, DCYF was evaluating Danielle's mother, Sherry Connor, for relative placement. They declined to approve Sherry after they received several unsettling reports about her. Those included claims that Sherry often got drunk, associated with drug users, and scared her grandchildren. The oldest, SV, who was about 9 or 10 at the time, reported that she witnessed Sherry hitting Danielle. The second oldest, 7 or 8-year-old MV, reported that his grandmother sexually abused him while she was drunk. Sherry had been charged with domestic violence in 2006 when she lived in Lake Milton, Ohio. After a bench trial, Sherry was found not guilty because the judge didn't believe the state had met its burden of proof. On her next domestic violence charge, however, barely 5 months after the first, she pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of menacing. There had been other charges throughout the years, but as is common in domestic violence situations, charges were dropped when the alleged victims declined to pursue them. Meanwhile, Danielle had returned to Manchester and was determined to get her kids back. She entered recovery, got clean, attended parenting classes, and found stable housing away from Dennis Sr. She did everything she possibly could to build a stable life for herself and, she hoped, for her children.
I wanted my kids back. And then a year passed.
Danielle did everything the system asked of her, but her efforts apparently weren't enough for DCYF, which tried to terminate her parental rights. The first year she was away from her children, Danielle said, she was only able to visit them twice. In June 2017, the Family Division Court ruled that the kids' foster mother had improperly interfered with Danielle's contact with her children, and the judge removed the kids from their foster home. DCYF had plans to place them in separate foster homes, but Danielle argued against it, knowing that her kids had been through enough trauma without being separated. The court suggested that DCYF place the kids with Sherry, despite the horrific reports they received about her, telling them to thoroughly investigate her guardianship of the kids and ordering them to conduct a home study. They never did. DCYF went ahead and placed Danielle's children with Sherry. By this time, she had guardianship over Danielle's 5th child for about 7 months. DCYF assured Danielle they'd monitor the children while in their grandmother's care. Remembering the fear and uncertainty of her own childhood, Danielle didn't love the arrangement, saying, "I knew my mom had that mean bone in her body." Even so, she held on to the hope that Sherry would treat her grandchildren with love and take good care of them. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I want to mention something that's made a huge difference for me lately. Researching and writing these episodes, doing my freelance work, and trying to keep my house and family organized, some days it's like trying to herd cats. You know Magic Mind has been a sponsor of the podcast for a while now, and that I'm a big fan of their little green mental performance shot, I've tried all 3 of their formulas, original with the yellow label, caffeine-free in calming blue-green, and Max with the bold red label, and Max is the one I keep reaching for. I needed something that would actually help me function through long days, and while the original formula had been working for me for quite a while, Max gave me even more of a boost. Max has 165 milligrams of caffeine, 3 times the caffeine of the original shot. But thanks to something called nano-encapsulation, it doesn't hit all at once and make me crash an hour later. It rolls out gradually over 3 to 4 hours, which means I can actually focus on my work without feeling like I've been launched into orbit. Between the L-theanine, the nootropics, and whatever dark magic is happening under that little red label, Max is the only reason I'm even semi-coherent before noon most days. If you're like me and have a to-do list longer than your arm and a brain that often turns to pudding, I can't recommend it enough. And here's the best part. Right now, they're giving their biggest discount to date. You can get 60% off your first subscription if you go to magicmind.com/LaneMF and use my code LANE60. That's magicmind.com/LAINEMF, and the code is LAINE60. If you try it and don't like it, they have a 100% money-back guarantee, no questions asked. I'll include my link and my code in the show notes. Remember, supporting my sponsors is a great way to support the show. Now, let's get back to Boo's story. Less than 2 weeks after her grandchildren were placed with her, Sherry Connor stormed into the DCYF district office with 3 of them, angry that she wasn't getting money for the children and that DCYF dropped them off with nothing. According to DCYF records, Sherry acted in a hostile manner, gritting her teeth, waving her arms, and banging on the hallway railing. She also yelled that DCYF fucked up her paperwork. This wasn't even the worst of Sherry's behavior. Between 2017 and 2019, DCYF received at least 27 reports from neighbors, anonymous parties, and several mandatory reporters that the Vaughan children were being abused. DCYF received the first report about Sherry potentially abusing her grandchildren on July 24, 2017. A nurse at the Laconia clinic alleged that Sherry may be sexually abusing her youngest grandchild based on the fact that the clinic found genital wart-type lesions around his anus, which are obviously not common in young children. DCYF followed up on this report, but after Sherry canceled a follow-up appointment for the child with Dartmouth Dermatology, saying the warts had disappeared, DCYF apparently took her at her word and never really attempted to find out what caused the lesions. The second report came in on August 17, 2017, from a New Hampton police sergeant after police responded to Jellystone Park on reports from several witnesses who observed a woman strike a young child and throw him in a tent. That young child was Boo. Witnesses reported seeing Sherry yell at 3-year-old Boo, grab him by the neck and face, hit his face, throw a cup of liquid in his face, and grab his arm and drag him to the tent. Witnesses heard screaming from the tent, causing them concern that the child may need medical attention. DCYF appended this information to the original complaint as an added allegation report. CPS workers conducted a home visit on August 21, 2017, during which Sherry claimed the child was MV, not Boo, and demonstrated how she took MV's face with her hands and yelled, leading him back to the tent by the arm and telling him to sit. Connor denied hitting or throwing water at Dennis, directly contradicting the 5 witnesses. One of the caseworkers questioned MV with Sherry present. DCYF Policy 1201, Interviewing Alleged Victims, states that the child needs to be interviewed in a neutral, uninfluenced, non-threatening, private, quiet place that is free from interruptions. Proving exactly why CPS workers shouldn't interview children in front of their alleged abusers, MV told the caseworker that his grandmother grabbed his face with her hands and held it, forcing him to look at her. During his interview, he looked over at Sherry a few times, as if looking for her approval that his description matched what Sherry had previously coached him to say. DCYF didn't investigate the added allegations beyond that, though, because they didn't bother contacting the reporting police officer or the 5 reporting witnesses. That, too, violated department policy, which stated that they were supposed to use their best efforts to contact all reporters before meeting with the family. Oh, and they didn't notify Danielle, the non-custodial parent, of the report, even though she had a legal right to know about it. The single assessment, consisting of the first 2 reports, was closed as unfounded in March 2018, 6 months past the deadline, and a full 246 days after the initial report. In a letter signed by CPS worker Ann Farley and supervisor Jessica Clark, DCYF wrote to Sherry, "The division has determined that the allegations in this child protection referral have been determined to be unfounded." Don't even get me started on the wording of that sentence. The letter also mentioned that to avoid any future concerns about the kids' welfare, Sherry should call 211, the New Hampshire helpline, or contact Lakes Region Community Services. She should also, the letter stated, get the kids timely medical care and make sure that all contact between the kids, Danielle, and Dennis Sr. was supervised. I'll pause here for a word from my sponsors. Despite the obvious reasons why they shouldn't, including the fact that a DCYF case against Sherry was still open, in January 2018, the department filed to give Sherry legal guardianship over the rest of her grandchildren, also requesting that she have discretion over Danielle's access to the kids. The petition was approved in March 2018, which made Sherry the children's legal guardian and gave her unilateral control over when, where, how, and if her daughter could visit or even communicate with her kids. At the time, Danielle was living in Manchester while Sherry lived in Laconia, which was an hour's drive away, and there was no public transportation between the two. Sherry would often claim that if Danielle took the bus to a stop about a half hour away, she'd pick her daughter up. However, that never happened. Between April 17th and April 30th, 2018, 8 professional mandatory reporters made a total of 6 separate complaints to DCYF about alleged abuse the Vaughan kids were suffering at the hands of their grandmother. The first of these complaints came from a social worker, nurse, and principal from IV and MV's school, who collectively reported that 8-year-old IV had noticeable bruising under his eye, a small bruise on his cheek, bruising in his inner ear and lobe, bruising behind both ears, a mark on his forehead, superficial scratches on his face, and bruises on his forearm. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, bruising to a child's ear is a big red flag that abuse might be happening. It's incredibly hard for a child to incur bruises in his ears, which usually occur due to sports injuries, car accidents, or abuse. IV claimed he was injured by wrestling with 9-year-old MV and running into a fence pole. However, the principal said that when she asked MV about IV's injuries, he denied causing them and said that Mimi, which is what the kids called Sherry, does stuff to IV. What kind of stuff? Well, MV disclosed that Mimi got angry when IV soiled his pants, which apparently happened often, although it had never happened at school. MV said that Mimi would put his brother in a diaper and make him run up and down the stairs repeatedly for a long time. He also disclosed that as punishment, Mimi would stuff a sock in his brother's mouth or force him to pee in the cellar. The school told Sherry that because of the extent of the bruising on his head, IV would have to be evaluated for possible head trauma at the emergency room before he could return to school. School staff took photos of IV's bruising, but DCYF never asked for them. The CPS caseworker again failed to speak with any school staff before meeting with the family. When he visited Sherry's home on April 17, 2018, she gave shifting, implausible, and incompatible explanations for IV's injuries, suggesting they might have come from cleaning, horseplay, or a recent fall on the bleachers at school. Hey, guess what? The school didn't even have bleachers. Even when a member of the school's after-school program staff called in and mentioned this, it didn't seem to alarm the caseworker that Sherry blatantly lied to his face. A couple of days after the initial report, Sherry took IV for his emergency room assessment at Elliott Hospital in Manchester. She didn't take him to Lakes Region General Hospital in Laconia because the school's social worker had notified that hospital about IV's bruises, and Sherry worried the kids would be taken away from her. At the hospital, a registered nurse trained in child abuse cases took 90 photos of over 20 bruises on Ivy's body from head to toe, including bruises caused by handcuffing, which is in itself a form of child abuse. A hospital social worker wrote that Ivy presented with multiple bruises, too numerous and in various stages, including symmetric bruising. In the social worker's belief, these injuries indicated non-accidental trauma. Medical staff determined that Ivy's injuries were non-accidental, but the DCYF caseworker allowed Sherry to leave the hospital with him, ordering Sherry to stop using any kind of physical punishment. Days later, a teacher at the boys' school reported multiple bruises on Ivy's face in different stages of healing, including on his cheekbone and his jaw. The caseworker doesn't appear to have followed up with the teacher about her report. About 10 days later, another teacher reported that MV had bruising on his face, and IV suffered from facial scratches. When the teacher asked MV how he got the multicolored 2-inch bruise on his left cheek, the boy said he didn't want to talk about it. The caseworker never contacted that teacher either. A DCYF supervisor closed the singular case regarding those 6 reports as unfounded on September 2, 2018. 138 days after the initial report, even though there was a 60-day deadline. Meanwhile, additional reports continued to roll in. On June 19th, an anonymous caller identified as a neighbor reported to DCYF that Sherry was always yelling at one of the boys. That very day, the neighbor reported, she saw Sherry push and kick one of the boys, yell at him, appear to slap him in the car, kick the crying boy again when he ran away from her, and tell him to keep running straight to the police station, causing him to cry, "I don't want to." A different caseworker visited the home on this report, but he was cut from the same cloth as the other one. He interviewed the child in front of Sherry, failed to interview all of the children even though they were all there at the time, failed to notify Danielle about the report, and when Sherry told him she used exercise as punishment, it didn't seem to worry him even though Sherry was prohibited from using physical punishment. In fact, Sherry forced the kids to work out until they literally had 6-packs. The 24-hour safety assessment took 3 months to complete, and the case was closed as incomplete in November. On August 6, 2018, an anonymous caller reported that Sherry was physically abusing the children in new ways that wouldn't leave marks, including forcing them to take ice-cold baths and suffocating them with pillows when they cried about it. The caller also told DCYF that Sherry made the kids run up and down the stairs 50 times without holding the railing, forced them to sleep in the locked basement with no lights and no toilet, made them pull down their pants so she could spank their bare bottoms, and exposed them to drug abuse. That, the caller said, included Sherry abusing her opioid pain medication and smoking cannabis all day with the kids in the same room. The caller also specifically referenced Sherry's treatment of then not quite 4-year-old Boo, saying the grandmother hates him the most, kept him in his high chair all day and all night, and often fed him rotten canned food without heating it. Another caseworker visited the home the next day, noting a very strong odor of urine in the home, which tracked with previous reports that the kids were denied access to a bathroom and made to use a bucket. Sherry told the caseworker that she knew her sister was the reporter, explaining that 8-year-old Ivy had accidents that required him to take a bath to clean up, but he was afraid of water because he didn't know how to swim, so he cried. Sherry claimed that her sister, seeing Ivy crying, assumed the bath was discipline. The caseworker just accepted that nonsensical story and didn't bother asking about the claim that Sherry suffocated the kids with pillows. Even though Sherry was very talkative and spoke very fast throughout this meeting, which could indicate she was under the influence of something, the caseworker didn't ask about the claim that Sherry abused drugs around the kids either. That case, along with an additional information report from a social worker concerned that Sherry wasn't acting in her grandchildren's best interests, you think, was closed as unfounded in November 2018. DCYS caseworkers routinely ignored the department's policies. They didn't inform Danielle about many of the reports. They failed to speak with each reporting party before interviewing the family. Against policy, they interviewed the children with Sherry present and in the home where the alleged abuse took place. They didn't interview all of the children in the household, even though they were present. They didn't bother asking either the children or Sherry about many of the allegations. They didn't question Sherry's ever-changing, implausible stories. They didn't complete the required 24-hour safety assessments within 24 hours, instead taking months to complete them, if at all. They marked the children as safe when they were anything but. Time after time, supervisors closed the cases as unfounded, despite every indication that Danielle's kids were suffering long-term, ongoing physical, emotional, and possibly sexual abuse, and were in grave danger in their grandmother's care. By the second year her kids were with Sherry, Danielle was able to get to Laconia more often to see them. She quickly began noticing disturbing patterns, including bruises on the kids' wrists and ears, and at one point, one of the children was hospitalized with a concussion. But whenever she questioned her mother, as we hear in almost every child's story, Sherry always managed to explain the injuries away. Danielle later told a reporter, "I wanted to believe her. She's my mom." During one visit with her kids, Danielle saw finger-shaped bruises on her kids' chins. She later said, "I knew those bruises. I knew what they were from." She described to the reporter the way her mother used to grab her by the chin so forcefully she nearly lifted her daughter off the floor, screaming, "Now you look at me." The bruises she saw on her kids' chins were the same as the ones she used to suffer. After that visit, she began reporting suspected abuse to DCYF, expecting that they would act to protect her children.
Every single time I saw them, they were covered in bruises, and they were unexplainable bruises.
Here's just one of Danielle's calls for a welfare check on her kids, this one taking place in April 2018.
Laconia Police Dispatcher.
Hi, I just had a question for you. My mom has guardianship of my children and was just recently accused of possibly physically abusing them.
Okay.
And it's two of my kids' birthdays today, and I've been trying to call, and for some reason she won't let me talk to them. Is there any way that you could do a welfare check on them just to make sure that everything's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. What's your name?
My name's Danielle Vaughan.
Danielle later said,
How can this organization that takes kids away from people for the very same thing put them in a situation that's even worse than what they ever encountered before?
For Christmas in 2018, Danielle visited Sherry's house on Irving Street in Laconia and was shocked to see just how horrific her children's living conditions were. Sherry's house was filthy. The floor was covered with both dog and human feces. The refrigerator and cabinets were locked, so the children couldn't get food or water. They were rail thin and starving, and when they got too thirsty, they drank from the toilet. And when they were caught, they were punished for it. Danielle left that visit in shock, wondering how the people responsible for the welfare of her children could think they were better off in that house than in her care. From that day forward, Danielle began calling DCYF every single day. She reported the abuse to the police. She contacted the New Hampshire office of the Child Advocate. Danielle reported her concerns to anyone who would listen, but no one took action. The abuse only escalated and the reports continued. Late in the evening of January 5, 2019, one of Sherry's neighbors called the Laconia police to report what she suspected was abuse.
Yeah, can I get an officer to 103 Blueberry Lane, apartment 67? I don't know if the lady is beating the crap out of her kids. It's 11 at night, and there is so much banging or whatever. I tried banging back. It is so profusely, and all that you can hear is her screaming at her kids. I have videos of them outside barefoot for an hour, literally, over the winter time. It happens every other day. I don't know if she's abusing the hell out of her kids or something, but she will not be quiet, and all that you can hear is, kids screaming.
All right.
I told her I was reporting her, but you might want to come here for safety, and I have proof.
All right.
And I am following it up with DCYF, just to let you know.
An officer responded, to whom Sherry explained that she had been punishing one of the kids for peeing on the wall by making them run up and down the stairs 10 times. The child confirmed her claim, and the officer told Sherry that it was late and to be mindful of her neighbors, filing the call as a noise complaint. Also in January, a school social worker visited Sherry's home, after which she made another report to DCYF, telling the intake worker that she smelled marijuana when Sherry opened the door, even though Boo and his younger brother were home. She said Sherry told her the older 2 boys urinated all over the bathroom, smeared feces around, and hid more of it wrapped in toilet paper around the house. For some reason, Sherry felt comfortable telling the social worker that she then began to force the boys to use 5-gallon buckets in the living room as toilets. The social worker reported that the boys were often bruised when they came to school and that they sometimes stole food from other kids' lunchboxes and took food from the trash, and that the teachers gave them water and snacks at school and told them not to tell their Mimi. Even more concerning were the statements Sherry made that the social worker reported during the same call. Sherry said she couldn't handle the boys and that her frustration with them prevented her from handling them appropriately. A court document later read, Connor made a series of statements indicating that she was intent on ridding the boys of both their father and the devil, including that Connor stated she found God. The boys were taught to follow the devil by their father, who was in a cult. She did not know what else to do with the boys aside from having the pastor come to the house to get the devil out of the boys, and she is going to have someone come to the house to get the devil out. That should have raised all the red flags for the intake worker that the boys were in grave danger, but it doesn't appear that DCYF even contacted the school social worker about her report. I'll take another quick break to hear from my sponsors. Reports continued rolling in. There were more bruises and scratches on the Vaughan children. A therapist was concerned about abuse and medical neglect. An anonymous caller reported Sherry's drug use once again, mentioning that her home reeked of marijuana and that Sherry had brought cannabis edibles to her neighbors. The house was filthy and hoarded. There was often yelling and banging, and the caller witnessed Sherry slap Boo in his mouth and poke him with a key for pushing his 2-year-old brother. A nurse at Lakes Region General Hospital reported that Sherry brought IV to the emergency room for mental health reasons, but left before the doctor could see him, appearing angry and screaming in the little boy's face. Around the end of June 2019, Danielle received a voicemail from Sherry that sounded like a butt dial or a call made by accident. In that voicemail, Danielle was horrified to hear the sound of a hand smacking against someone's flesh and her 8-year-old son, Ivy, screaming. She also heard her mother cursing, calling the boy names, and shrieking like a maniac. Danielle didn't hesitate. On June 25, 2019, she filed a motion to terminate her mother's guardianship over her 5 children. Danielle also contacted DCYF about her concerns that the kids were unsafe living with Sherry. About a week later, a Laconia police officer sent a DCYF caseworker an email about a neighbor's report of alleged abuse. The email read, "The neighbors next door provided information and later statements 2 days before you went there to check on the family. They also gave me a video of a kid being left outside. These are videos from November 2018 to January 2019. The video shows one child, a young male, barefoot and sometimes with shoes in cold weather, doing homework in the fenced-in backyard. I checked the weather for the dates that are listed with the videos. The temps range from 37 degrees to 44 degrees. They heard other stories of the kids peeing and pooping into buckets in the house. The reporters believe the child is being punished for something, and that's why they leave him outside." Then, Sherry pulled a stunt befitting a cartoon supervillain. While staying at a campground in Epsom, about a 40-minute drive from Laconia, Sherry took umbrage with something Ivy said or did. According to Danielle, Sherry and 2 other grown adults with her began beating Ivy and kicking the 8-year-old repeatedly in the groin. When another camper objected, Sherry began fighting with her, yelling that Ivy shouldn't be rewarded for his behavior. Finally, Sherry, duct-taped her grandson to a chair in the middle of the campground and abandoned him there. The police responded soon afterward. Danielle called DCYF the next day to report what her son had told her. His disclosures included that Connor duct-taped him to a chair during the camping trip, Connor put hot jalapeno sauce on his and MV's privates for punishment, and Connor made SV sleep in a laundry basket for punishment. The caseworker interviewed IV at Danielle's home, where IV confirmed his allegations. IV later disclosed to an interviewer at the local Child Advocacy Center, or CAC, that Sherry had taped him to a chair at the campground, left bruises on him and his older brother by hitting them with a belt, and also beat 5-year-old Boo and left bruises all over his body. Danielle played for the caseworker the inadvertent voicemail Sherry left for her. The caseworker, who I'll call JH, later documented hearing Sherry, whose speech was slurred, yelling and berating IV while he sobbed. The caseworker also recorded some of the statements he heard Sherry make to her grandson in the voicemail, which included, "I can't wait to get rid of you. You fucking piece of shit. Fucking dirty dog. Little fucking bitch. Little motherfucker. Fucking neighbors are gonna call the cops on me. Shut the fuck up, you little shit." Fortunately, caseworker JH took action, creating a safety plan to remove IV from Sherry and place him with Danielle due to the abuse the boy suffered, noting concerns of excessive discipline, confinement while in the care of grandmother, and grandmother instructing siblings to harm IV. The inexplicable part was that even though IV had disclosed physical abuse to all 4 of his siblings, the safety plan said nothing about removing the other children, who DCYF left in their allegedly abusive grandmother's so-called care. You might wonder why Sherry had such a vendetta against her 8-year-old grandson, who was clearly her scapegoat, although all of the children suffered in one way or another. According to Danielle, Sherry was able to convince the 2 oldest children that Danielle was the bad guy in the situation. No matter what Sherry said, though, IV and Boo, the best behaved of Danielle's 5 children, loved their mommy and refused to turn on her. This angered Sherry, who took her fury out on the older of the 2. After IV was removed from her home, Sherry refused to let Danielle see her other children. Danielle never saw Boo again. Unbeknownst to her, now that Sherry no longer had IV to use as her personal punching bag, her target shifted, and Boo became her scapegoat. Sherry did point her ire at one other person as well, the DCYF caseworker, JH. Sherry called the agency, alleging that the man only helped Danielle to get IV back because the caseworker was having an affair with Danielle. Whatever Sherry told the agency was convincing enough that the man was actually fired from his job. Somehow, Sherry Connor's word was gold. In the interest of getting this out in a timely manner, I'll end this episode here. In part 2, which I'll have out in a few days, you'll hear the rest of Boo's story. Then, in part 3, you'll hear my conversation with his mom, Danielle Vaughan. My sources for this episode were Legacy.com, the Justice for Dennis Boo Vaughan Jr. Facebook page, WMUR News 9, the Laconia Daily Sun, the Conway Daily Sun, the New Hampshire Union Leader, the New Hampshire Bulletin, Patch.com, the New Hampshire Office of the Attorney General's website, the New Hampshire Judicial Branch Case Access Portal, the Riposta Funeral Home website, New Hampshire Revised Statutes, and Danielle Vaughan. Don't forget, I'll include my special Magic Mind link and code in the show notes for this episode. Let me know if you try it and which formula's your favorite. That's it for this episode. Join me next time for part 2 of Boo's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.